Hello!
Hello everybody.
Welcome to our humble channel.
Yes.
What are we doing today, Mr. Ryan?
Well, we're going to look at a plant in profile today, which is an interesting South American.
An interesting South American, like Paddington Bear.
Yes, maybe.
It is from the same country, is it not?
Yes, Peru.
Peru! Let's go to furthest Peru.
Come with me. It's right over here.
Mr. Ryan, what is before us?
This plant is a shrub from Peru and surrounding parts of northern South America.
Yes.
It's in the same family as the angel's trumpet, so people will sort of see the family resemblances in the flower.
Brugmansia.
Brugmansia. It's called Iochroma, which means purple coloured.
Iochroma.
And of course this particular species is purple coloured, but there are other colours in the genus, so they're not all this colour. And this one is Iochroma grandiflora, which means big flowered. And
But now, many things have the grandiflora suffix.
yes,
It's as common as muck.
yeah, and it just means that the flowers are big in comparison to others of the same genus.
So size matters in Iochroma.
Well, it does in horticulture in general, because you can get grandiflora varieties of things that have absolutely minute flowers.
Really?
But they're even bigger than the other ones.
Aha, I see.
So, or they were the biggest they found when they named it.
But in terms of gardening and horticulture, are they all garden plants or just these larger ones?
No, I would say they're all good in gardens. The smaller flowered ones often make up for that lack of size by quantity, so they'll often have bigger heads of flowers, so they're always quite showy, and they flower for months.
Okay, so what does that mean? What is the flowering time?
All right, if it hasn't got knocked back by the frost, which it actually often does in my climate because I get winter frosts up here, if it's got old wood still on it from last year, it'll start flowering about mid-spring, and it'll still be in flower at the end of autumn.
So if you don't have frost, if you're in a more temperate Mediterranean climate?
Well, it could in fact flower virtually year-round, which could be seen as boring.
Why?
Because you get used to something.
It's colour, I'm so bored.
Yeah, well, no, it's odd because you will, if you've got something that flowers all year round, what happens is you become...
breeds contempt.
Yeah, exactly. Just the term I was looking for. But it does happen that way. Sometimes it's better if you've got plants that do several different things throughout the year because that keeps you entertained and engaged. If the plant flowers all year round, that thing, it's always there. And so you don't tend to be so excited by it. So it's actually not a bad thing if things have a season.
Now, this to me looks quite tall.
Yes.
How do you define a small tree and a shrub?
I would define this as a shrub.
Yep.
It's multi-stemmed, which is always a good characteristic if you're going to be a shrub. But it's a large shrub. One could almost say it's a shrub with delusions of grandeur. 4 metres-ish. It will get up tall enough to hide you, the neighbours, the fence.
So in terms of the kind of garden size, now, I, as you know, am plotting a purple and yellow vulgar front garden in our house in Carlton.
Which is tiny, the garden.
But must we use such derogatory terms? It is enough.
Yes.
So could you control this? Could you prune this to maintain more of an upright shape but kind of control it a little bit?
You could, in fact, because what you would do is, if it were my smallish garden, I would remove the lower limbs. So I would bring the canopy up so that I can then underplant and make as much use as possible of the available space. And as time goes on, people will find that I am a very, very good person at using every available space. So you could lift it up and canopy it up. You can also prune them back quite hard every so often.
So this is the next question. Would you prune it annually? Given that it could flower all year in the right climate, does that mean you need to trim it once a year or just let it do its thing? If you've got the room to let it do its thing, just let it do its thing, because it is then going to repay the whole year round. But you probably in a smaller space garden will at certain times need to cut it back. So you just pick a period of the year, probably towards the end of winter, when it's probably at its least productive, and prune it quite hard at that point in time, and then start it off again. And it will refurbish the whole plant almost in one growing season, so it's quite quick growing. So climatically, let's talk about its motherland. So it's not high altitude? It's
moderate.
Foothills.
Foothills of the Andes probably. So it comes from that part of South America, and it will grow perfectly well in the average Mediterranean style climate where you don't get too much heavy winter frost. It's very sun tolerant. It will cope with shade. It's not water hungry. So once it gets established, I don't water this plant at all intentionally after having been in the ground many years.
So it is frost sensitive, but it will survive gentle frost.
Yeah, it will survive gentle frosts, and once it builds up a woody trunk, it'll always reshoot from that.
Right, but not a hard winter. So climatically, if you were in Britain, for example, this would be
a pot in the orangery.
in the orangery.
Yes.
You could plant it outside in a pot, bring it in to winter it. Same in a cold part of North America.
Well, that's what I have done here over the years with some plants that I know to be too frost sensitive for me. I've grown them in a pot. I often just sink the pot in the ground.
Yes.
Then I lift it up and put it on the veranda for the winter. Of course, at some stage or another, you will come unstuck because you won't be quick enough.
And I have to say, I'm also just too lazy to do that. But anyway, the other extreme, heat. We are in Melbourne. Well, we're not. We're in Macedon, but it's in Victoria,
exactly.
in Australia. You can get some brutally hot summers here.
Yep. It laughs at hot summers, as one should, more than I do. I wilt in hot summers, but this will go through 45 degrees.
Really?
With a howling northwesterly.
Which is what, about 105 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah, and it will go through that with maybe just a tiny bit of foliage burn.
It can do everything. You can use it in a small city garden. You could use it as a glamorous indoor plant if you're in a cold climate.
Yep.
It can take full sun, it can take shade. It is not water needy. It can take extreme heat, and it's frost Ish. Wow, it's a wonder plant.
It is a wonder plant, and I guess the only other thing I would mention in passing, if you are growing it in a container, you can make it almost a part-time bonsai. So every couple of years, come on, you've got to do this.
No, I feel bonsai it's like sociopathic torture.
Can I say,
I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, I don't mean in the sense that you're going to manipulate the top of the plant particularly. You will prune the plant back. But what you will do is in the winter, towards the end of winter, you'll roll it out of the pot. You will rake out a whole pile of the potting mix and do some root pruning. And then you can put it back in the same pot and get another season out of it. So you just keep recycling the same plant, whereas a lot of pot plants get pot bound and then you've got to discard them or plant them out.
Because it's too big.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the other point then, I suppose, of propagation by seed, by cuttings. What would you do?
Cuttings. If you're taking cuttings of Iochroma, you'd go back into the slightly older wood, well below the flower head, cut something around about pencil thickness. Obviously, we all know that you cut below a node at the bottom of a stem and above the node at the top of the stem. You'd then strip off some of the lower leaves and then pop that into a propagating mix.
Just to be clear, this is green wood, so this is new growth.
Yeah, that's fairly new growth, and you would put it into a sharp sand or propagating mix of some sort, put a bell jar over it or something to keep the humidity up, and
it
will strike as easily as your average geranium / fuchsia / hydrangea.
And they are really easy to propagate. Wow.
So,
which then, I guess, brings us to the other point of how easy is it to find. And things go through fashions. It looks very Queen Mother and Edwardian. I mean, was it once fashionable? Now it's not. Is it hard to find?
Yeah, well, almost yes to everything. It was one of those things in the early part of the last century, would have been used in all the parks and gardens. It would have been a very popular plant in large suburban gardens because it grew really quickly and flowered for months. It sort of went out of fashion probably in the 60s when the Australian native plant push came along, because a lot of quite useful plants disappeared at that point in time just because they didn't naturally live here. And a lot of these plants are now coming back. People are realising the value of some of these plants. I mean, they have no weedy potential, they're easy to grow, easy to propagate, give great value for the space, and just because they come from Peru shouldn't stop you growing them.
Paddington came from Peru. And
well, exactly.
Love Paddington. It looks lovely, but it also looks toxic.
Yes, well, it is related.
To paraphrase Britney Spears.
Yeah.
Is this toxic?
Yes, it is toxic. It's also hallucinogenic, but not in a good way. I mean, no, don't go there.
So us just holding the plant like this.
Not a problem. No, you've actually got to ingest it. So, and there's lots of
the
toxic.
Story, don't eat Iochroma.
No, or Brugmansia, or in fact anything you're not familiar with. I mean, it would just seem silly to me to go round browsing your garden.
That's
nice. Yes, it's a lovely plant. It must be edible. No.
So, Mr. Ryan, let's talk availability. Is it easy to find? Are you going to find it in your average garden centre nursery?
Unfortunately, probably not. So it's one of those plants that you'll have to do a little bit of hunting around to get. It'll be available through a few of the more specialist rare plant nurseries.
Like yours?
Possibly mine. You will see it in quite a lot of people's gardens though.
Right.
And that takes you back to the cutting thing.
You could ask nicely.
Yes. Never steal a cutting.
Do you never? Have you never stolen a cutting?
Truthfully. Truthfully, probably I have. Yeah. When it's.
I'm not saying you have, but I assume.
Yeah. But I do not recommend it.
No,
because
it's about karma.
It is about karma. And I find that if I see something in somebody's garden that I desperately want, if I go knock on the door and ask them politely for a cutting off their plant, they're normally so pleased that you've actually asked them for a plant. You've got something in their garden that you want. And so I've never been knocked back. Ever. So I've always been very upfront and asked people for a cutting of a plant, because you don't know how that plant works in somebody's garden. I mean, I've had people want something from me that I can't give them because I'm keeping it for propagating purposes or whatever. And that includes even a flower. You know, you could pick a flower off somebody's plant and they say, oh, but I was waiting for the seed. So yes, you do ask, you always ask.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is around suburban Melbourne in quite a lot of people's gardens.
And internationally, do you think, is it a species that you'd find in North America, in Britain?
In Britain, probably not so much, other than perhaps as a conservatory plant.
Yeah.
In southern parts of North America, I wouldn't see any reason why it wouldn't be grown in people's gardens in California and Florida and all those sorts of places. But you're not going to see it in the far northern states unless they do, again treat it that way.
Plant.
Yeah.
So it requires a bit of footwork to find.
Yes, but that's part of the fun.
Part of the joy of having unusual things.
Part of the fun of plants is the hunt, as much as anything. And that leads me all the time. Well, I hope you enjoyed that.
I did. Now, a recap. Iochroma.
Yes.
Grandiflora.
Grandiflora. Well
Big
done. Well
flower.
done. Yes,
'Cause
exactly.
size matters.
Yes, it does.
In
it
the
does
Iochroma
indeed.
world. Thank you very much for watching.
And I hope you really enjoyed it. And if you've got any questions, just put it below and we will deal with it in due course.
We won't. Stephen will, because I won't be able to answer them. I can make up something.
Yeah.
Talking of which, have you ever made up Latin names, Mr. Ryan?
Well, now we're getting into my secret world here. I have done.
Yes.
With a tongue-in-cheek, I might add.
Okay.
But
otherwise, you do have a mind like a steel trap and remember them all.
Yes, well, normally. But if it's a plant I've never met before and somebody says, what's that? If I think I can get away with it, I will call it a Snuggadootzia. Which is a fictitious genus, and I'll just add an appropriate species name. Unless they've got a pen and paper to write it down, they'll forget immediately.
That's Snuggadootzia.
Yes, exactly.
I hope you've enjoyed watching this too. Feel free to subscribe, feel free to like, feel free to ask Stephen Ryan a question that I won't be able to answer, and we'll see you next week with something
very different.
There you go. See you next week.